The apartment was small enough that every sound seemed to echo. Every cough, every whispered prayer, every trembling note from Madison's guitar. It sat on the corner of an aging brick building, its paint long since peeled by the Tennessee sun. The walls were cracked in places, patched with mismatched plaster, and the single window facing the alley let in a sliver of gray morning light. But to Madison Rivers it was home, a stage, a sanctuary, and sometimes a battlefield between hope and despair. She sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, the guitar nearly as big as her. The wood was scuffed, one string slightly frayed, and the sound hole bore the faint outlines of her mother's fingerprints. Madison plucked each string gently, testing the pitch by ear the way Sarah had taught her. Her small fingers fumbled once, twice before finding the right chord. She took a deep breath and began to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice was soft at first, uncertain. Then it grew, rich and pure, filling the cramped apartment with a kind of fragile warmth that didn't belong to the world outside. The sound threaded through the space like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, chasing away the shadows that lingered in corners. From the couch, beneath a mountain of mismatched blankets, Sarah Rivers smiled weakly. Her skin was pale and paper-thin, her once vibrant hair dull beneath the glow of the flickering lamp. She watched her daughter with eyes that still held a spark, even as her body betrayed her. Every breath seemed to cost her something, but when Madison sang, the pain eased, if only for a little while. "That's my little songbird," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with both love and exhaustion. Madison looked up and grinned. "You think I'm getting better, Mama?" Sarah nodded, though her throat tightened painfully. "Better every day, baby girl. One day they'll all hear you. You'll sing in big halls with shining lights and no one will ever forget your voice." Madison's smile faded as she noticed the half-empty pill bottle on the coffee table. The label was creased and worn, the refill date long past. She didn't say anything. Instead, she reached into a small tin hidden behind the stack of old mail. "Mama's surgery" was written across the lid in marker and dropped in 2 crumpled dollar bills. From the corner she'd sung on earlier that afternoon, she turned back to her mother, her eyes bright with determination, far too heavy for a child. "When we get enough, you'll feel better again. I'll sing all day if I have to." Sarah's lips curved into a soft, broken smile. "You already make me feel better, sweetheart." Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, the sound of the city's constant struggle pressing against the thin walls. Inside, Madison's song continued, steady, defiant, tender. On the counter by the stove, a folded newspaper sat beneath an empty teacup. The headline read, "America's Next Country Star, auditions in Nashville this weekend." Below it, a glossy photo showed the panel of judges, their smiles polished and practiced. Among them was a man in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp beneath the studio lights. Michael Sterling, producer, Billionaire, and household name. When Sarah's eyes had first fallen on that photo earlier in the day, something inside her had cracked open. She'd traced his face with a trembling finger, her heart twisting as old memories flickered. Memories she had buried beneath years of quiet survival. The man who had left her with nothing but a baby and a song was now smiling from the pages of her daughter's dream. Now, as Madison's voice carried through the air again, Sarah pressed the paper face down beneath the cup, hiding the photograph as if it could burn her. Madison finished the song with a long, lingering note, eyes closed as though she were holding the last piece of light in her small hands. When the final chord faded, silence filled the apartment. For a heartbeat, the world felt still. Then Sarah began to cough, deep, rasping, unstoppable. Madison dropped the guitar and rushed to her side, holding her mother's hand until the coughing slowed. "I'm okay, baby," Sarah whispered when she could finally speak. "Just a bad spell." Madison didn't answer. She climbed onto the couch beside her mother, curled into her side and rested her head against her chest, listening to the faint, uneven rhythm of her heartbeat. Through the cracked window, the city glimmered faintly in the distance, alive with dreams Madison could barely imagine. She didn't know that one of those glittering towers belonged to the man whose name her mother could no longer say aloud. The man who, within days, would hear her song and realize the truth that would change everything. For now, all Madison knew was her mother's warmth, the quiet hum of a tired guitar, and the promise of a song that might just save them both. The rain hadn't stopped all night. It drummed softly on the rusted metal roof like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping out a song only the weary could hear. The ceiling leaked again, and Madison had placed an old pot beneath the drip, watching the rhythmic splashes as if counting down the seconds of her world unraveling. Her mother was asleep, or pretending to be. Sarah's breathing came in uneven waves, soft gasps followed by trembling sighs. Her chest rose and fell beneath the patchwork quilt that had once belonged to Madison's grandmother. In the dim light, Sarah looked smaller than Madison remembered, as though every breath she took stole a piece of her strength. Madison sat on the floor beside the couch, hugging her knees, staring at the tin can that held their hopes, Mama's surgery. It wasn't even half full. She opened it, counting the crumpled bills and coins again, even though she already knew the number by heart. $416. It might as well have been $4 for what it could do against cancer. She'd been singing every day on the same street corner, right by the bakery that smelled like cinnamon rolls she could never afford. Some days people tossed her a few quarters, other days they just hurried by, eyes averted, pretending not to hear the little girl with the too big guitar and the too bright voice. But Madison never stopped, because stopping meant losing. A sudden cough shattered the silence, violent and raw. Sarah's body convulsed, her thin hands clutching her chest. Madison was at her side instantly, panic flooding her face. "Mama, breathe slow," she whispered, stroking her mother's damp forehead. "You're okay. You're okay." It took a full minute before Sarah caught her breath again. Her lips were pale, her eyes watery with exhaustion. "Guess I'm not as tough as I used to be," she murmured, forcing a smile. Madison bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "You just need your medicine again. I can sing longer tomorrow. Maybe down by the bus stop, more people walk there." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand, gripping it weakly. "No, baby. You're 7. You're supposed to play, not work yourself to the bone." "But I want to." Madison's voice cracked, a mixture of fear and defiance. "If I sing more, maybe we can pay Dr. Patterson again, maybe—" Her throat closed around the rest. Sarah's heart ached at the desperation in that small voice. She wanted to tell her daughter that things would be okay, that miracles happened, that good people always got second chances. But she'd lived long enough to know better. Sometimes the world didn't care how good you were. It just kept turning, leaving you behind. Her eyes drifted toward the counter, where the folded newspaper still sat beneath the teacup. The headline peeked out like a whisper of fate. "America's Next Country Star auditions this weekend." She remembered that name again, Michael Sterling, and her pulse quickened, an ache blooming in her chest that had nothing to do with illness. She could still see him as he was years ago, charming, ambitious, eyes full of dreams and promises he never kept. He had walked out when Madison was just 6 months old, leaving only a note and a hollow silence that had never quite gone away. Sarah had sworn she'd never let Madison know what kind of man he really was. But as she lay there now, watching her little girl's face illuminated by the glow of the streetlight through the window, a thought she'd buried for years began to surface. Maybe this audition wasn't an accident. Maybe the universe had a cruel sense of irony. The next morning arrived wrapped in a pale, uncertain dawn. Madison woke before her mother, packing the guitar carefully into its frayed case. She laid out her best outfit, jeans with only one knee torn and a faded pink sweater Mrs. Chen had given her last Christmas. "Where are you going so early, songbird?" Sarah croaked, sitting up slowly. Madison turned, guilt flashing across her face. "I was going to go practice outside the diner before the breakfast rush. People tip better when it's still quiet." Sarah smiled softly, though her heart was breaking. "Before you go, come here." Madison obeyed, crawling into her mother's lap as Sarah brushed a tangled curl from her daughter's cheek. "Do you remember what I told you about singing?" Madison nodded. "Sing from my heart, not just my throat." "That's right," Sarah said, her smile trembling. "Because songs from the heart, they reach farther. Even people who don't want to listen can't help but hear them." Madison hugged her tightly. "You're going to be okay, Mama. I'll make sure of it." "I know you will," Sarah whispered. "You're my sunshine." That afternoon, as Madison sang beneath the diner awning, the sound carried farther than usual. People actually stopped to listen. Truck drivers, waitresses, a couple walking their dog. Even Mrs. Chen came by, clutching a folded bill in her trembling hands. "For luck, little songbird," the old woman said, pressing the money into Madison's palm. Madison looked down, $20. Her eyes widened. "Mrs. Chen, I can't." "You can," the woman interrupted gently. "Luck needs a place to go. You look like someone who deserves some. That night, Madison showed her mother the extra money. For a fleeting moment, Sarah let herself dream. But when Madison fell asleep on the couch, clutching the guitar like a teddy bear, Sarah reached for the newspaper one last time. Her fingers traced Michael Sterling's name again. The photo of him, smiling confidently beside the words head judge, stared back mockingly. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the print. She didn't believe in fate. But if there was even a chance, just one small, impossible chance, that the man who once abandoned her might unknowingly hear his own daughter sing, maybe that was the kind of miracle she'd been praying for. She folded the paper gently, whispering into the darkness, "Please, God, let her be heard." Outside, thunder rolled over the city, and in their tiny apartment, Madison stirred in her sleep, her lips forming the words to the song she would sing in just a few days. The song that would shatter hearts, change lives, and bring the past storming back under the blinding light of a stage. The morning of the audition dawned cold and gray, as though the sky itself were holding its breath. Rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the streets slick and shining under the first weak rays of sunlight. The city felt larger that day, louder, faster, more impatient with small dreams. But none of that mattered to Madison Rivers. She woke before the alarm, her heart thudding in rhythm with the rainwater dripping from the eaves. Her tiny fingers were trembling as she buttoned her sweater, the one with a missing button shaped like a heart. Her guitar leaned against the wall, its case frayed at the edges, smelling faintly of old wood and dreams. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, pale and trembling, her oxygen tube coiled loosely beside her like a snake waiting to strike. The light from the window painted her face in fragile gold, turning her thinning hair into a halo she didn't deserve to wear so painfully. She smiled when she saw Madison, weak but proud. "Big day, Songbird," she said softly. Madison nodded, eyes sparkling beneath the weight of exhaustion and hope. "We're gonna make it, Mama, you'll see." Sarah's hand shook as she reached for her mug. "You don't have to do this for me, baby." "I'm not," Madison said quickly. "I'm doing it for us." Outside, the city buses groaned awake, and Mrs. Chen knocked softly at their door, her wrinkled face glowing with quiet pride. "Come," she said, her voice tender but firm. "I will ride with you to the station." She held a worn umbrella in one hand, and in the other a paper bag with 2 boiled eggs, a thermos of tea, and a small bundle of hope. Sarah rose from the chair too quickly, her legs trembling, but she steadied herself with a stubborn breath. "No, Mrs. Chen, I'm coming too." Mrs. Chen's brows furrowed. "You're too weak." Sarah smiled, though the effort cost her. "If my baby's going to stand on that stage, I'm going to be there to see it. I've missed enough moments already." The bus ride into downtown Nashville felt endless. The hum of the engine vibrated through Madison's bones as she clutched the guitar on her lap, staring out the window at the world beyond her reach. Glass towers, billboards, and strangers moving like rivers of color. Sarah sat beside her, breathing shallowly, her lips pale but eyes full of fire. The closer they got, the bigger the world seemed to grow. And Madison, in her scuffed sneakers and faded jeans, felt smaller with every stop. When they stepped off the bus, the audition center loomed before them like a cathedral built for dreams, a sleek tower of glass and steel, its logo glittering above the entrance. America's Next Country Star. Hundreds of people were already there. The crowd spilled across the sidewalk, hopeful faces, gleaming guitars, sequined jackets, and eyes that burned with ambition. Some were singing to warm up their voices, others rehearsing in whispers. Madison stared up at them in awe. "Mama," she whispered, clutching her mother's trembling hand. "They all look so big." Sarah knelt down slowly, ignoring the pain in her knees. "They might look big, sweetheart," she said, "but none of them sing with what you've got." Madison frowned. "What do I have?" Sarah smiled, her lips trembling. "Heart. You've got a whole world in that little voice of yours." The line to register wound like a serpent around the lobby. The walls shimmered with posters of past winners, men and women beaming beneath golden lights, their arms raised triumphantly. Madison stared at them, each one a reflection of a dream she wasn't sure she deserved. Contestants chatted, laughed, and posed for selfies. One tall teenager eyed Madison's guitar and smirked. "You lost, kid? This ain't the children's choir." Madison said nothing. She just looked at him, chin raised. I'm not lost, she said. I'm here to win, Sarah stifled a laugh, pride flashing in her weary eyes. At the check-in table, a young woman with a headset and clipboard leaned down and tied a paper wristband around Madison's arm. A 247, it read. Next holding group's in 15, she said briskly. You'll go on after lunch. Sarah's breath hitched. That long? The woman didn't look up. Lots of contestants today, ma'am. You can wait in the holding area downstairs. The hours stretched painfully. The air buzzed with nerves and excitement. Madison sat quietly, her legs swinging beneath her chair, watching the other singers rehearse. Some had expensive microphones, some had backup tracks, and some carried the kind of confidence only money could buy. She just had her mother, and a guitar that smelled like rain and memory. Sarah dozed off in her chair, her hand still holding Madison's sleeve. Madison didn't wake her when her name was called. Contestant 247, Madison Rivers, the stage assistant shouted. She took a deep breath, lifting the guitar onto her shoulder. Her heart thumped so loud she thought the cameras might catch it. The assistant smiled kindly as he guided her toward the hallway that led to the stage. Don't be scared, he whispered. They're just people. But Madison knew that wasn't true. The judges weren't just people. They were gods of this world, deciders of fate. As she stepped closer to the stage doors, she heard the muffled sound of the previous contestant's performance ending, followed by tepid applause. The assistant touched her shoulder. You're up next. Madison turned one last time. Through the glass partition, she saw her mother watching from the far side of the waiting area. Sarah was standing now barely, one hand pressed to her heart, the other lifted in a trembling wave. Madison smiled, small but fierce, and mouthed, I love you. Then the doors opened and the light hit her like a storm. The stage was vast, blinding, golden, endless. The air smelled like hairspray, sweat, and electricity. 3 figures sat behind a long curved table, framed by camera rigs and studio lights. Jessica Walsh leaned forward, all warmth and grace. Robert Martinez tapped his pen thoughtfully. And at the center sat Michael Sterling, the man who would change everything. He didn't look up at first, flipping through his notes with the mechanical detachment of a man who'd seen too many dreams die in one room. But something about the silence, the shift in air, made him glance toward the small figure standing under the spotlight. A little girl, holding a guitar too big for her body, her eyes green like glass. For the first time that day, Michael Sterling forgot to breathe. Hello there, Jessica said gently. What's your name, sweetheart? Madison's voice trembled, but she stood tall. Madison Rivers. Something flickered across Michael's face, a faint tightening around the jaw, the kind a man makes when something inside him stirs. And why are you here today, Madison? Robert asked kindly. She swallowed hard, gripping the guitar. My mom is real sick, she said. She needs an operation and I don't got enough money. But I can sing, so I thought maybe if I win, I can help her get better. Silence blanketed the room. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Michael Sterling's pen fell from his hand. For a moment, one long, breathless moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the lights. Then Madison lifted her guitar strap onto her shoulder, stepped into the center of the stage, and said quietly, "This song is for her." She strummed the first note. And as the melody rose, trembling, pure, achingly beautiful, the world outside that stage disappeared. The crowd, the judges, the cameras, all that remained was a small girl with a heart too big for her chest, singing a song that had lived in her blood since the day she was born. You are my sunshine. Michael Sterling froze. His heart clenched like a fist. Somewhere deep inside him, a long-buried memory began to wake. The first note shimmered through the auditorium like light breaking through storm clouds. Madison's voice was fragile at first, soft, almost trembling. But there was something raw in it, something that caught even the most jaded producer off guard. The crowd, restless a moment before, fell completely silent. You are my sunshine, she sang, her voice trembling with both fear and faith. My only sunshine. The words hung in the air, haunting and familiar, echoing through the massive hall with a purity that seemed impossible from someone so small. Michael Sterling's pen rolled slowly off the desk and hit the floor with a soft clatter. He didn't move. He couldn't. He stared at the girl standing in the center of the stage, her eyes squeezed shut, fingers clutching the neck of the guitar like it was the only thing keeping her standing. The tone, the phrasing, the quiet ache in her voice, it clawed at something deep inside him. Jessica Walsh, the pop star with a reputation for composure, blinked rapidly, her mascara trembling on the edge of tears. Robert Martinez, the gruff music veteran, leaned forward, elbows on the table, his jaw tightening. And Michael felt like he'd been struck by lightning. The song, that song. He hadn't heard You Are My Sunshine in years. Not since that rainy night when Sarah had sung it to their baby daughter to lull her to sleep. He remembered the way her voice had cracked slightly on the word, happy, the way she'd looked down at the infant in her arms as if holding the whole world. That same voice was now coming from this child. He swallowed hard, his throat burning as his mind tried to make sense of what his heart already knew. The girl's eyes, green and bright like shattered glass, the way her nose crinkled when she hit a high note. It was all too familiar. Madison's voice swelled. Steady now, her fear melting away as she sang for the only person that mattered. When skies are gray. Backstage, Sarah Rivers clutched the railing, her body shaking with effort. She'd insisted on standing close enough to see her daughter perform, even though her legs barely held her upright. Every breath was a battle now, her lungs scraping like paper against stone. Tears streaked her cheeks as she watched Madison, her little girl, command a stage meant for giants. She wanted to call out, to tell her how proud she was, how perfect, how luminous, but the words died in her throat. A cough tore through her chest instead, deep and violent. Blood spattered onto her sleeve. The nearest production assistant turned at the sound. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Sarah waved him off, gripping the rail tighter. Don't stop her," she rasped. "She's singing. For me." On stage, Madison hit the final verse. Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of love. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Jessica pressed a trembling hand over her heart. Robert's eyes glistened beneath his glasses. The camera crew, usually emotionless professionals, stood still behind their equipment, the red recording lights blinking like beating hearts. Michael Sterling leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring as if the world had stopped spinning. He could hear Sarah's voice layered behind the child's, soft, ghostly, echoing through time. Every word was a dagger, every note a memory. And then, mid-song, Madison opened her eyes. For the first time since stepping on stage, she looked at the judges. Straight at them. Straight at him. Michael felt his chest seize. Her gaze locked on his, innocent, unflinching, and the breath caught in his lungs. Those eyes. The same eyes that once stared up at him from a crib. The same green that had followed him in every nightmare since he'd walked away. Madison didn't know who he was, but he did. He knew. The crowd exploded into applause before the final chord had even faded. The sound filled the room like thunder, but Madison barely heard it. She was staring into the lights, blinking back tears, clutching the guitar against her chest like a lifeline. Michael couldn't speak. His throat locked. His hands trembled against the desk. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to form. Jessica broke the silence first. "Sweetheart," she said gently, her voice shaking. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Robert nodded. "You've got soul, kid, real soul. I've seen grown adults perform for decades without touching an audience like that." But Michael said nothing. He just sat there, frozen, eyes glistening. Finally, Jessica turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Michael?" He blinked as if waking from a dream. His voice cracked. "That song, where did you learn it?" Madison tilted her head slightly. "My mama taught me." Something inside him shattered, the world went silent around him. The lights blurred. The cameras, the stage, the people, all of it melted into a haze of memory. Sarah's laughter, soft and melodic, the smell of her hair after the rain, the night he'd packed his bag and told himself he was doing the right thing. The look on her face when he closed the door. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His heart hammered against his ribs. Backstage chaos erupted. Sarah collapsed mid-clap, her body folding like a broken wing. The production assistant screamed for help. "We need a medic. Someone call 911. Madison's head snapped toward the commotion. "Mama," she dropped the guitar. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. She ran for the wings, dodging past startled crew members. her small shoes pounding against the floor. "Mama!" The cameras kept rolling. Michael stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. For a moment, the world tilted sideways. His mind screamed denial. But his body was already moving. Past the judge's table, past the cameras, past the chaos of crew members shouting into headsets. He followed the sound of Madison's cries. By the time he reached the hallway behind the stage, 2 paramedics were kneeling beside Sarah. Her skin was ashen, her breathing shallow. Madison was on the floor beside her, clutching her mother's cold hand, sobbing. "Please don't go, Mama. Please, I sang for you. You gotta wake up." Michael froze at the doorway. His entire body went numb. Sarah. Even through the pallor of sickness, he knew that face. The woman he had once loved. The woman he'd left behind in a tiny apartment with a newborn and a broken heart. She looked so small now, so fragile, but still impossibly beautiful. One of the medics looked up. "Sir, please step back." But Michael couldn't. His feet felt cemented to the ground. Madison turned suddenly, her tear-streaked face lifting toward him. "Help her!" she cried. "Please, somebody help my mama." Michael stumbled forward, his vision blurring. He wanted to reach for her, both of them, but guilt and fear held him like iron chains. He fell to his knees beside Sarah as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, the faintest glimmer of awareness passing through them. And then she saw him. For a split second, their gazes locked, hers clouded with pain, his with remorse so deep it could drown a soul. "Sarah," he whispered, her lips parted. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Her hand twitched weakly toward him before slipping away. The paramedics rushed her out through the back corridor, the sound of the stretcher wheels echoing down the hall. Madison chased after them, but a crew member caught her gently. Holding her back, Michael stood in the wreckage of his own past, his daughter's, cries echoing off the walls, and realized the truth he'd spent years running. From the girl he'd just watched sing her heart out on national television wasn't just a contestant. She was his child, and the woman fighting for her life was the only person who had ever loved him, honestly. As the cameras went dark and the applause faded to whispers, the echo of Madison's voice still lingered in the air. "You are my sunshine." And for the first time in years, Michael Sterling wept. The weight of secrets, the sirens screamed through the night, slicing the heavy air like blades. The flashing red lights washed over the wet pavement as the ambulance tore down the narrow Nashville streets, carrying what little remained of Sarah Rivers' strength. Inside, Madison clung to her mother's limp hand, whispering the only prayer she knew. "Please, God, don't take her yet. Please." I sang for her. I did everything right. The paramedic beside her tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He'd seen too many scenes like this. Too many desperate children whispering bargains into the dark. When they reached the hospital, Madison stumbled out of the ambulance, the hem of her sweater soaked in rain. The automatic doors opened with a hiss, flooding the sterile lobby with cold light. Nurses swarmed around the stretcher, speaking in clipped tones, their shoes squeaking against the linoleum. "Ma'am, you need to wait here," one of them said, gently steering Madison toward a row of plastic chairs in the waiting area. "But she needs me," Madison cried, her voice breaking. "We'll take good care of her, sweetheart. I promise." The doors to the emergency wing swung closed before she could answer. The glass reflected her small, terrified face, a reflection of powerlessness. She sank into a chair, hugging her guitar to her chest. It still smelled faintly of her mother's hands, warm, soft, alive. The lobby around her was filled with strangers, a man cradling his injured hand, an old woman clutching a purse to her chest, a teenage boy with blood on his jeans. The world kept moving. No one saw her shaking. Minutes blurred into hours. She counted the tiles on the floor. 57. She counted again. 57. Again. It was the only way to stop herself from crying, and somewhere in that endless waiting, Michael Sterling appeared. He stepped through the hospital doors as though walking into a dream or a nightmare. His tailored suit, immaculate hours ago beneath studio lights, was now soaked from the rain. His hair clung to his forehead. His eyes, usually so sharp, so composed, and were wild. The nurse at the counter looked up in surprise. "Sir, visiting hours. I'm looking for Sarah Rivers," he cut in, his voice raw, cracking through the tension. She was just brought in. Stage collapse at the Grandview Center. The nurse frowned. And you are? Michael froze. Who was he? A stranger? A ghost from the past? A man who had forfeited the right to that name 7 years ago? His lips trembled, but he found no words. He started, then stopped. Madison looked up. The voice struck her instantly. Deep, commanding, familiar from television and commercials. She'd seen his face on billboards, on screens. The judge, her stomach twisted. You're that man from the show, she whispered. Michael turned toward the sound. His gaze fell on her. Small, trembling, sitting alone with a guitar half her size. His world stopped moving. Her eyes. Green. The same green that had once stared up at him from a crib he'd walked away from. Her nose, her mouth, her defiant chin. Sarah's mirror. Madison, he said before realizing he'd spoken her name aloud. Her head tilted in confusion. How do you know my name? He froze again. The truth hung between them like a blade. The air seemed to thicken until breathing hurt. He wanted to fall to his knees right there, to tell her everything, how he had loved her mother, how he had been a coward, how he had watched her sing and known deep down that fate was punishing him with his own reflection. But she looked at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes, trusting him the way a child trusts any adult who looks like they might save her, and he couldn't destroy that. Not yet, because he swallowed hard. Because I was there. I saw you sing. Madison blinked. Mama, she was watching me too. She said she'd be okay until I finished. Her lip trembled, but she wasn't. Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that no child should carry that kind of guilt, but the words caught like glass in his mouth. Because deep inside he knew this wasn't fate's cruelty. It was his. He crouched in front of her, his expensive clothes crumpling on the hospital floor. Your mother's strong, he said softly. She's the strongest person I ever knew. The words slipped out before he could stop them, before he could edit himself back into the polished, heartless mogul the world knew. Madison blinked again. You knew my mama? Michael froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. He was standing on a cliff edge, and one wrong word and everything would fall apart. She sang once, he said finally, a long time ago. Madison studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, believing him. Children believe what their hearts need to. They sat in silence. The rain against the windows grew heavier. At last a doctor appeared, and gray-haired, weary, his glasses fogged from the humidity. He scanned the waiting room, found Madison, and knelt beside her chair. You're Sarah Rivers' daughter? Madison nodded quickly. Is she okay? The doctor hesitated, glancing briefly at Michael, as if expecting him to step forward to be the adult, the protector. But Michael couldn't, his legs wouldn't move. She's stable, the doctor said finally, but she's very weak. We've moved her to intensive care. Can I see her? Madison whispered. Only for a few minutes. Madison jumped up, clutching her guitar case by reflex. She turned to Michael. Can you wait here for me? Please. Michael nodded numbly. Go, he managed. She disappeared down the corridor behind the doctor. When she was gone, Michael slumped into the chair she'd left behind, his head in his hands. For the first time in years, he didn't care who saw him cry. He remembered the letter he'd written the night he left Sarah. I need to build something for us. He'd lied. I'll come back when I've made enough to give you both the life you deserve. He never came back. He buried himself in money, success, distractions, but nothing he'd built, no stage, no empire, could fill the hollow his cowardice had carved. Now fate had dragged him back here to this sterile hospital hallway, to the daughter who didn't know his name, and the woman dying because of choices he'd made. Through the glass window at the end of the corridor, he could see Sarah lying still beneath white sheets. Madison sat beside her, holding her mother's hand, humming You Are My Sunshine under her breath, and Michael Sterling and the man the world called a genius, a star maker, a millionaire, had sat in the shadows, broken and silent, listening to the song that had once been his lullaby. For the first time, he understood what true failure sounded like. The face of a father, the corridor outside the ICU was bathed in cold, sterile light, the kind that erased warmth and mercy alike. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and despair. Machines hummed softly behind closed doors. their rhythmic beeps marking time in a place where time itself often stopped. Michael Sterling sat alone at the end of the hallway, elbows on his knees, staring at the cracks in the linoleum floor. His phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from producers, assistants, press agents. The noise of the life he had built echoing in a world that no longer seemed to matter. He turned it off. The silence that followed was almost deafening. He lifted his head. Through the glass window at the far end of the corridor, he could see her. Sarah Rivers, the woman he had loved once, truly loved, before ambition swallowed him whole. Her hair was thin now, her cheeks sunken, her skin ghostly against the white pillow. Tubes trailed from her nose and arm, tethering her to a dozen blinking machines that were the only reason she was still breathing. Beside her sat Madison. The child's small frame seemed lost in the hospital chair. She was holding her mother's hand, stroking it gently, whispering something Michael couldn't hear. Occasionally, she'd hum a few bars of the song, "You Are My Sunshine." Even through the glass, the melody tore him apart. A nurse appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. "Your family?" Michael froze. The question sliced deeper than it should have. For a long moment, he couldn't answer. Then quietly, he said, "Yes." The nurse nodded, not noticing the tremor in his voice. "She's awake, but weak. Don't exhaust her." Michael rose slowly, every movement heavy, and followed the nurse down the hall. His reflection flickered across the glass door before him. Tailored suit wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes hollowed by guilt. For the first time in his life, he didn't recognize the man staring back. When he stepped into the room, the faint hiss of the oxygen filled the silence. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air. Madison looked up first. Her face brightened when she saw him. "You came," she whispered, as though afraid her voice might disturb the fragile stillness. Michael nodded, his throat thick. "I told you I'd wait." She smiled, small, tired, trusting. "Mama's awake now. She asked for me." Sarah stirred weakly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze found Madison first, then shifted slowly, hesitantly, to the man standing by the doorway. Her eyes widened. For a moment, confusion clouded them, then recognition struck like a thunderclap. She inhaled sharply, her fragile body trembling. "Michael." Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry, but it was enough to pierce the air. Madison blinked, glancing between them. "Mama, you know him?" The room went still. Michael's chest ached. His voice broke as he stepped closer. "Sarah." How her eyes filled with tears, years of silence collapsing between them. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said, taking another hesitant step forward. "But I had to be. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know she was mine." Sarah's breath caught. The monitors beeped faster. She turned her head toward Madison, then back at him. "You didn't want to know?" Michael flinched as if struck. "That's not true." "I was a coward, yes. I left because I thought success would fix everything. I told myself I'd come back when I could give you more than an empty apartment and a dream. But then 1 year turned into 2, and by the time I realized what I'd lost..." His voice broke completely. "You were gone." Tears streamed down Sarah's pale cheeks. "You traded us for stages and cameras," she rasped. "You can't undo that, Michael. I'm not trying to undo it." He sank into the chair beside her, his hands shaking. "I just want to make it right, and whatever that means. Just let me help you, please." Sarah closed her eyes, her breath shallow. "You can't buy forgiveness." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "I'm asking for a chance." For a long time, there was only the sound of the machines. Madison stood frozen between them, her gaze darting from her mother's tears to the stranger's trembling hands. She didn't understand everything, but she could feel it. The heaviness, the ache. The way her mother's name on his lips sounded too familiar. "Are you my daddy?" she asked suddenly, her voice small but unflinching. Both adults froze. The world seemed to stop moving. Michael turned toward her, eyes wide, the question slicing through the room like a blade. Sarah's breath hitched audibly and a single tear slid down her temple. "Madison," she whispered weakly. Michael's throat burned. He looked at the little girl, the child who had unknowingly sung her way back into his life. His heart cracked under the weight of all he'd missed, her first steps, her laughter, her birthdays, her tears. He took a slow, trembling breath. Yes, he said at last. I am. Madison stared at him, confusion, wonder, and anger swirling together in her young eyes. But Mama said Daddy left. Sarah's voice was barely audible. He did. Madison's lower lip quivered. Then why's he here now? The question cut deeper than any accusation could have. Michael looked at her, really looked at her, and saw every mistake of his life reflected in those green eyes. Because I was wrong, he said simply. Because I should have been here every day. Because I never stopped loving your mama. And because when you sang tonight, his voice trembled. I heard my whole life in your song. Madison didn't respond. She turned back to her mother, clutching her hand again. Sarah closed her eyes, exhausted, her chest rising and falling weakly beneath the hospital sheets. You can hate me, Michael whispered to her. You have every right to. But please, don't take her away from me again. Sarah opened her eyes slowly, pain and love mingling in their depths. She's never been yours to take, she said softly. She's herself, strong, brave, everything we weren't. Michael bowed his head. Then let me be here. For both of you. Let me help Sarah. Please. For the first time in years, her expression softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something that lived next to it. A fragile, trembling grace, be here then, she whispered. Not with your money. Not with promises. Just be here. Michael reached out, his hand covering hers gently. I swear I will. And for a moment, one fragile, luminous moment, peace settled over the room. Madison laid her head on her mother's shoulder. Sarah brushed her daughter's hair weakly with trembling fingers. Michael sat silently beside them, the weight of years pressing down on his chest, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. Outside, dawn began to rise over the city, streaks of gold cutting through the dark. Inside, the family that had been broken by pride and silence began at last to find its way back to one another. But even as that fragile hope took root, a shadow lingered, for the night was not done testing them. Because fate, once awakened, is never content with half-truths. And before the next sunrise, everything would change again. You are my sunshine, the morning arrived quietly, not with the blaze of sunrise, but with a thin veil of gray light that drifted through the hospital window. Nashville was waking up outside, but in room 214, time had slowed to something softer, something sacred. Sarah Rivers lay still beneath the thin blanket, her skin pale and translucent, her breathing shallow but steady. The beeping of the monitors punctuated the silence like a fragile heartbeat holding on to one last melody. Beside her, Madison slept in a curled heap, one small hand still holding her mother's fingers. Her hair was messy, her cheek pressed against the edge of the bed. In her sleep, she murmured the words of the song that had carried them this far. Michael sat in the corner of the room, eyes fixed on them both. He hadn't moved all night. The events of the past day replayed endlessly in his mind. Madison's trembling voice on stage, Sarah's collapse, the confession that had ripped open 7 years of buried regret. He had built empires out of sound and steel. He had molded stars, shaped dreams, and sold millions of records. Yet here, in this cold hospital room, everything he had ever wanted, and everything he had ever destroyed, rested within arm's reach. A nurse entered quietly, checked the monitors, and gave him a sympathetic smile before leaving them in peace. Sarah stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, heavy and glassy, but alive. You stayed, she whispered, her voice so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it. Michael leaned forward. I'm not leaving again. She smiled weakly, her lips trembling. You used to say that before. He bowed his head, shame burning in his chest. I meant it now. Every word. Her gaze softened, and for the first time forgiveness flickered in her eyes. Quiet, unspoken, but real. She has your stubbornness, she murmured. Michael looked toward Madison, still sleeping, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She has your heart, he said. A small laugh escaped Sarah. Soft, breathless, beautiful. Then maybe she'll be okay. The words lingered in the air like a blessing. A few hours later, the producers from the show arrived, accompanied by Jessica Walsh and Robert Martinez. They spoke quietly to Michael outside the room, their faces solemn. Her audition, it's gone viral, Jessica said softly. Millions of views overnight. The whole country's talking about her. People are donating for her mom's surgery. Michael's throat tightened. It's too late for that, he whispered. Robert looked down, nodding slowly. Maybe, but it's not too late for her song to matter. When they left, Michael returned to the room and found Madison awake, sitting by her mother's side, humming. Her small voice filled the sterile air with warmth. Sarah smiled faintly. "My sunshine," she whispered. Madison leaned closer. "Mama, they said I can sing again." On the big stage. For the finals. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering like a candle in wind. "You'll sing?" Madison nodded. "For you." Tears pooled at the corners of Sarah's eyes. "Then sing with your whole heart, baby. Don't be afraid of the light. It's yours." Michael swallowed the lump in his throat. He knew what Sarah meant. Not just the performance, but the legacy. The courage to keep shining even when the world went dark. That night, under the glare of studio lights, Madison stood once more on the stage that had changed everything. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had ironed for her, and her guitar, old, worn, perfect, hung across her shoulder. The crowd filled the auditorium, buzzing with expectation. Cameras hovered. Reporters whispered. The nation waited to hear the little girl with the voice that had stopped the world. Backstage, Michael watched from the shadows, one hand pressed to the glass separating him from the stage. He was no longer a judge, not tonight. He was just a father praying for a miracle. When Madison stepped into the spotlight, the audience fell silent. She took a deep breath, the same way her mother had taught her. Then she smiled. That bright, trembling, heartbreaking smile, and then began to play. "You Are My Sunshine." The first note echoed through the theater, pure and trembling. The crowd stilled. "My only sunshine." Each word carried more than melody. It carried love, grief, memory, and 1,000 unspoken promises. Madison's voice was stronger than before, but it wavered with emotion. She sang not for fame, not for applause, but for the woman lying miles away in a hospital bed. The one who had taught her to turn pain into light. "You make me happy. When skies are gray." In the audience, people wept openly. Crew members stopped working to listen. Even the cynical producers were motionless, tears glinting under the stage lights. In the hospital room, Sarah Rivers lay with her eyes closed. The soft sound of Madison's voice playing through the television beside her bed. The nurse had turned up the volume, and the melody filled the sterile air with warmth. A single tear slid down Sarah's cheek. Her lips moved faintly. "That's my girl," she whispered. Her breathing slowed, soft and peaceful. Back on stage, Madison's voice reached the final verse. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." She paused, her eyes glistening, her throat tight. She could feel her mother's presence, not in the audience, not behind the cameras, but everywhere. In the air, in the music, in her own heartbeat. "Please don't take my sunshine away." The last note lingered, pure and heartbreaking, before dissolving into silence. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then the crowd rose as one, the applause crashing like thunder. But Madison didn't bow. She just looked upward, smiling through tears, whispering so softly the microphones barely caught it. "I did it, Mama." In the hospital room, the monitor beside Sarah's bed let out a single long tone. The nurse rushed to her side, but it was too late. Sarah Rivers was gone. Her face, though, was peaceful. Her lips still curved in a faint smile, as if she were still listening to her daughter sing. Hours later, after the cameras had dimmed and the theater had emptied, Madison sat backstage with her guitar in her lap. The golden trophy lay forgotten beside her, meaningless compared to what she'd lost. Michael approached quietly. He knelt beside her, his eyes red. "She heard you," he said. "I know she did." Madison didn't look up. "She's gone, isn't she?" He nodded. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She leaned into him, hesitant at first, then completely, and for the first time, he wrapped his arms around her. They stayed that way for a long time. Father and daughter bound by grief and love and the echo of a song that would never die. When they finally stepped outside, dawn was breaking over Nashville. The city glowed beneath a pale golden sky. Madison looked up. She said, "Sunshine means hope," she whispered. "That even when it rains, it's still there." Michael smiled weakly, brushing her hair from her eyes. She was right. They stood together, the morning light spilling over them like a blessing. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, and a faint breeze stirred the air, warm, gentle, familiar. And for a moment it felt like Sarah was there, smiling, whispering her final lullaby through the wind. "You are my sunshine." The words drifted through the air, soft as a mother's touch. Madison closed her eyes and began to hum, not out of sorrow, but out of love. A promise carried forward in song, and as the sun rose over the city, the little girl with the voice that could melt stone took her first steps into a new day, not alone, not anymore, but forever carrying the light her mother had left behind.